Is it just me, or do you occasionally when you're at school, do you get that in cartoons when somebody does the wrong thing or they're about to do the wrong thing, and you see the angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder? Do you ever feel like that sometimes at school? You sort of do something and you're walking away and you sort of hear both voices. I did that once, and once is probably a big lie. I've made many, many mistakes in my teaching, many poor choices in the way that I've worked with young people. But I remember a kid that in particular called Matt Gunther, who I taught in a particularly favourite year 5-6 class that I had one year. And they were just terrific kids, just great kids, and loved working with them. And but one day, and Matt wasn't even a naughty kid. You try not to label kids, but you do think of them sometimes with these fuzzy labels over their heads. And Matt wasn't even that kid. You know that kid, don't you? Because you have that moment when that kid isn't there at about 9:03. And you have this conversation, and it's almost the angel and the devil starting to warm up their vocals, because part of you is going, he's not here. And part of you is going, be professional. It's a shame he's missing out on his education. And the other part of you is going, he's not here. And Matt wasn't even that kid. He was just my class clown. And he was my kid that had a joke for absolutely everything. And one day he joked once too often. And I gave it to him. I absolutely gave it to him. And as the rant slowly became less about me and me starting to realise that I was actually having an impact on him, I saw his face change. And it was the face of an 11-year-old boy who thought he had a fantastic relationship with his teacher, who had a large male standing over him angrily screaming at him. And the emotion that I triggered in Matt was fear. Undoubtedly, it was fear. And his face changed, because I think for a moment he thought, nah, he's pulling my leg. He doesn't mean all of this. And the truth was, I was letting go. I really gave it to him. Because under pressure, we default in certain directions, and sometimes we default towards punishment. And that punishment is something that we have had ingrained in us, not only as educators, but it's been a part of who we are and the way we've operated from the time we were born. There's a model around crime and punishment that many of us are familiar with. And that's okay, because it comes from a way of learning. It comes from trial and error. And for too many schools, we've become quite fear averse. We've become quite mistake averse, failure averse. That we don't like to make mistakes, so we eliminate experiences where they might happen. And we eliminate one of the most important ways to learn, which is trial and error. Males in the room, you know this. You know this. Because all of us were told by our mothers repeatedly, do not touch the stove. Do not touch the stove. But how did we learn? We touched the stove. So trial and error is a perfectly valid way to learn things, but somehow we turned it into crime and punishment. And then when it became the default of something that we experienced from such a young age, through our own families, through our own schooling, through our own early teaching days, it became the way that we operated collectively. The problem is that it amplifies the devil on our shoulder. When I spoke to Matt, and when I ripped into Matt, I walked out of that classroom and the angel spoke to me and said, Adam, not on. That practice does not match up with what you believe about working with young people. You need to fix it. And the devil spoke to me too. And he said, he so deserved that. Go get a coffee. And it's really just about which voice we listen to. And it's one of the reasons that I absolutely love working restoratively, is that it allows me to listen to the right voice. It allows me to get explicit enough about my practice and the connection between what I believe about working with young people and the way that I practice. It allows me to get explicit enough about it to be able to know what I need to do next. What do you reckon? With Matt, what did I need to do next? Apologise. We've got a funny thing about that as teachers, haven't we? I mentioned it to a teacher one day in the Northern Territory at a rather interesting school. And she made a noise when I mentioned that apology can be a really powerful thing. She made a noise like this. And she said, "You can't be serious. But I'm going to stand in front of my class of year 9s and I'm going to say, look, I'm really sorry you don't want to do maths today, or I'm sorry you didn't have any breakfast, or I'm sorry you were up late last night," and everything like that. You just hand over all your authority, all of your power, and the kids will walk all over you. And I said, "Well, look, you've been doing it this way for maybe 30 years. Could you try it? Could you trial it?" And she said, "Yep," quite confidently. And I went back and saw her a few weeks later and said, "How'd you go?" And she goes, "Yeah, all right." And I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Yeah, I did it." She goes, "And it works." She goes, "But I'm only doing it because it works." Okay, well, I'll wear that. She goes, "Actually, I'm now apologising for things that aren't my fault, but only because it works." And I was prepared to take the win, because what's happening is we're taking the first step or two away from an old model to a new model, and the new model that better supports us to enact the things that we believe about working with young people. And what I'd like to do today is to work you through exactly how we do that. Now, when I'm going to teach something, I guess what I'm trying to do today is to teach you a little about both what restorative practices is and how to lead it. I will be very clear that what I'd like to do is speak to the motivation about, firstly, why we should do it. I want to just declare in front of you and disappoint you that I'm not going to talk to you about why. I'm going to make a big assumption that we all think that restorative practices isn't a bad idea, and that I need to step quickly into the what we need to do and how we need to do it. So I'm going to ignore the why part today. And we're going to, if you want to talk to me about why restorative practices can work and how it fits within the program, then by all means come and have a bite over lunch with me and let's have a good yarn about that. But I want to focus on things that you can actually do practically. And then I want to focus on the factors that allow you to do it successfully around restorative practices as we go today. So this is the slide, I guess. And even around slides today, if there's anything up there that interests you today, don't feel like you need to write it down. You can email me at the end of today. I'll send you the whole of every slideshow that we put up there. But this is a really critical slide, because the one why moment that I want to address here is about what restorative practices does. Because people ask me often, so that restorative practices thing, that does behaviour management, doesn't it? And I say, well, it kind of does, but it does it in a Pantene kind of way, that it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. That it's a small part of something that behaviour management for me is a small part of something that's much larger, and that's about how we develop school culture. And I want to contend to you that the most powerful thing that restorative practices does is allow us to build a strong, sustainable school culture around focusing on harm and relationships. The way that we do that is we start to get very clear about explicit practice. So when people ask me what restorative practices is all about, I say it's about getting explicit about our practice, not implicit about our practice. There's a difference, isn't there, between having a plan and not having a plan? And the trap for us is that we're really good at implicit practice. If schools were open and we got a call that said that down the road there was another couple of schools that a crazy virus has gone through, and it has wiped out everybody that is above the age of 18. You are the only educators we know who are offline today. We need you to get down there now and get that school to 3:30. Could we do it? We could, couldn't we? Would we do it better if they said we need you to do it tomorrow and we had time this afternoon to plan? We would, wouldn't we? So it's about affording ourselves the opportunity to get explicit about all of those informal things and get consistent about those informal things in the way we move forward. And so there are 4 key arms that we attend to when we're looking to lead a restorative school. The whole notion of becoming very explicit about our practice. And the first one is understanding the restorative framework. And there are 2 key components of that framework that I want to draw your attention to. Number 1 is the continuum. Now, the restorative continuum parallels very nicely with what I was talking about before when I said that at one end we have the informal and at the other end we have the formal. Now, if you were to think in your school about the number of interactions you have, not the importance, just the number of interactions that you have in your day with students and with parents and with colleagues, where would you say most of them were? Are they at the informal end or are they at the formal end? We're quite informal in the way that, there's lots of, formally I might get up and give you some instruction as a teacher, but then after that there's lots of walking around, love that, don't stab her with the pen, and all that, get going, like that, and all that sort of thing. So there's lots of informal interactions that overwhelm. So what we want to do is start to get clear about how can we start to get consistent about the informal end. Now, at the very end of this informal scope is our language. It's what we call effective statements. And this is one thing that if you're looking to lead a restorative revolution in your school, this is the one area that I would contend very strongly to you that you start. I love effective statements. I love effective language. It's changed the whole way that I work with young people. And that if I come and visit one of your schools and a young person drops a piece of rubbish on the ground, my default for what I might say to them has completely changed. Can I ask you, what do you think we normally say? What's our default? If we see a young person drop a piece of rubbish on the ground, what would we say normally? Pick that up. I can't do it anymore. I've changed it through focusing on effective statements at the very informal end of this continuum. The effective statement here is, disappoints me to see you do that, put it in the bin. Now, could I ask you, 250 people in the room, could you just collectively, right now, when I say, I'm going to say 1, 2, 3 at the end of it, I want you to tell me what was the word you heard me say loudest? 1, 2, 3? Funny, isn't it? We're wired to hear that word, to hear that affective word, that word that's about feelings. So if we're looking to exploit the continuum to change our language, basically at the very informal end, all we need to do is say what we would normally say and chuck in a feelings word. Chuck in a feelings word. I said this delivering at a tough middle school in the Northern Territory, and I watched one of the teachers just sort of smile, and he was a young guy and sitting there in his sort of PE uniform, and I said, I just feel like you got something to say, and he goes, no, it's cool. He goes, I'm going to give it a go. I'll give it a go. He said, but I teach the Year 9 boys ed class, and he said, and I play footy at the same footy club with all of these boys. And he said, my problem that I'm trying to address is language, is swearing. He said they have decided, because they've seen me at the training track and they've seen me at the bar, that they can use the language in that context and they can bring it into the learning environment. Every time I tick them off, they go, we've seen you speak like that as well. And like that. He said, I can't, it's not working for me. He said, and I just can't see myself telling these Year 9 boys that I'm disappointed in the language that they're bringing into the classroom. But he said, I'll give it a go. And so he talked to me about that, and I went back again a few weeks later for their in-class support day, and I said, so how'd you go? And he said, it was interesting. He said the first day, they came in, and he said, and it took about 40 seconds for the first kid to swear. And he said he turned around and looked at him and said, really disappoints me that you'd speak like that in the classroom, makes me feel like you don't respect my work. And he went back to the whiteboard, like this. And he said there was this weird, awkward silence behind him. And he said, and then eventually the class came back to normal. And about a few minutes later, the next kid swore. And he said he spun around ready to hit him with the effective statement. But he said before he did, the other kid next to him elbowed him and said, hey, you better not. You might disappoint him again. And he said he kind of picked up on it in a take the mickey kind of way. And I said, okay. I said, that's interesting. I said, did it get rid of swearing in your classroom? And he said, no. And I said, did it improve it at all? And he said, like nothing I've ever tried before. By his estimation, swearing in his Year 9 boys ed class had come down by about 70%. And to him, that was a bit of a miracle. That was absolutely fantastic. The next step along the restorative continuum, if you can think about effective statements as being right down here, the next step along is what we call effective interactions. Because you notice the first one with an effective statement, I don't want a conversation here. I don't need to talk to you about why you dropped the piece of rubbish on the ground. I don't think it's particularly relevant. I need to move fast. Down the informal end, there's so many of these, isn't there? How many times in a day do you reckon you use the equivalent of pick that up in other contexts? Or my average in talking to teachers when they're being conservative, I reckon, is about 50. Now, in a school of even 20 staff members, that's 1,000 a day. It's 5,000 a week. And what we're doing, without even interacting with them, by just changing our language around the statements that we deliver, is we're finding 5,000 opportunities so that basically by Chinese water torture, we are teaching our young people that their behaviour affects other people. Makes a difference. And it's the most powerful place that I think we can start on the restorative journey. The next step is an effective interaction, which is about us starting to say, can we ask questions instead of make statements? So you guys have been working for me really, really well today, and I really appreciate the attention that you're paying. But Lorraine, you and that iPad down there, I can see what you're doing. I get to see occasionally how much time I've got left, but I know that you're playing Angry Birds every time you turn that thing around. And I know that, and I've given you a warning about it, and I tried to use the effect. I'm really disappointed that you're doing that, but it's not having any impact. So what I might do is go over to Lorraine. I'm going to get you guys to work, and then I'm going to quietly slip over to Lorraine. I'm going to go, hey, what's going on with the iPad? How do you think that's affecting everybody else here and me? What are you going to do about it? 3 quick questions, and what the questions are designed to do is to go past, present, future. Past, present, future. Everything about the old model that we've used in working with young people is about the past. Who had a moment last year where you felt like far more like a detective than a teacher? And we default to this amazingly quickly. And like that, how many of you caught yourself last year calling witnesses? Because, you two have been at it. I can tell that there's been a problem between you two at recess, because you've got a scratch on your face and a tear in your eye, and you're sort of sitting there looking upset as well, but with a slight tinge of triumph about you. And I need to work on this and all that. So I ask you what happened, and you've given me, I'll go to you first because you're crying, and I'll go to you first, and you give me a story that there's some credibility missing from this. So I'll ask you, and you go, you don't care anyway, you never listen to me. And so, I don't know. You were there. You tell me what happened. And you're sitting there going, I want to be a part of this. I just want to be friends with everyone. And so I've got 3 stories now, and none of them are of any use to me. Fine. Go next door and get Emily for me, will you? Emily always tells the truth, doesn't she? That. I'll find out from Emily what really happened here. And so someone trots off to get Emily. Nobody likes Emily, do they? She's the school dobber. She has no friends, and even though she wasn't even there, she'll make something up. And it'll probably get you in trouble. And all the while, what I'm doing in my head here, by focusing everything on the past like a detective, what I'm doing in my head here is I'm trying to ascertain blame. I'm trying to determine, using my old punishment model, how much I need to give you and how much I need to give you. And here's the funny thing about that. Because what I'm trying to do, aren't I, is change behaviour. Is that right? Am I trying to improve behaviour? Yeah. No behaviour changes in isolation. No behaviour changes randomly and for no reason. None of us just woke up this morning on a diet. None of us just walked into the kitchen and went, you're kidding me, half a grapefruit. And like that. What happens is there's this whole bunch of thinking that happens before it. You've got to see a terrible infomercial at 1:30 in the morning for the ab scruncher roller twister thingy, or you've got to speak to a friend who's been on light and easy for the 15th go, or you've got to, you see a photo of yourself 5 years ago, and you have this moment where you're standing in the supermarket with the Cocoa Pops and with the grapefruit, and you go, no, and then the behaviour changes. So what we're in the business of is not in changing behaviour, we're in the business of changing thinking. Now, when I try to ascertain blame here and I go, okay, I think I've got enough from, you weren't particularly helpful, but Emily helped me out a lot. You know what, this has been 3 times in the last 2 weeks. So 2 lunchtimes for you, and I'm going to give Mum a call. You, I don't think this was entirely not your fault, so I'm watching you. You're on a reprimand. And I walk away. What do you reckon these 2 are thinking? What's Mr. 2 Lunchtimes thinking? I hate this bloke. You never believe me. So, likely to lead to a positive change in behaviour? No. What's Mr. Reprimand thinking? Likely to lead to a positive change in behaviour? No. So what we want to do is to start to change the thinking, and the best way we can do that is get the conversation out of the past. and start to move it forward through past, present, and then future-orientated questions. The middle of the continuum is where we start to talk about small impromptu conversations. So when you get small groups, issues with social groups, ever had that? I believe that every teacher has a superpower and a kryptonite. You know that I have a kryptonite. Girls between year 6 and year 8. I mean, what's going on with them? I truly believe there is not a species on the planet better capable of anchoring a conversation in the past than a year 7 girl. And you ask them, they come and see you straight after lunch, because that's the time that, they don't want to waste their lunchtime. They'll see you straight after lunch and waste the period after lunch. And you say to them, girls, what's the problem? And one of them will look at you and go, she looked at me funny in year 2 and I knew we'd never be friends. So I laugh sometimes, it's like my marriage. Everything in the past is admissible in an argument today. They're so good at the past. In the middle of the continuum, I thought, how am I going to deal with this? Because if those girls arrive in my office as a principal, that's an hour of my life that I will never get back. And they will leave after that hour, and I will sit there and go, I think I made that worse. And so I needed to get clear about how I was going to do it. So what I did was got really explicit about the past, present, future thing. So I put a whiteboard up in my office that had the past, I had P3, P3, F3. And the girls would come in and sit down. I go, girls, for 3 minutes we're going to talk about the past. Tell me what's happened. Tell me what's wrong. Go. And I'll write everything they tell me. And after 3 minutes, the timer goes off, and I say, girls, we've finished talking about the past now. And one of them will say, yeah, but you didn't see how her mum spoke to my mum at netball on Sunday. And I go, I don't care. If you haven't got to the point of the problem in the first 3 minutes, it ain't the point of the problem. For 3 minutes now, tell me about the present. How's this making people feel? Oh, it's making me angry, it's making me sad, because someone will cry, because every group has a serial crier. And so you put all the feelings up there that everyone's feeling. Okay, and the buzzer goes off again. And then for 3 minutes, we're going to talk about the future. What are you going to do to fix this? And they make plans about the apologies they're going to make, the agreements about commitment that they're going to have from now on. I'll put a little asterisk next to one of them, which is I'm going to come and talk to you on Friday and see how the plan's going. The timer goes off again, and I say, get out. Go back to class. And so some people tell me that restorative practices it takes too long. Well, every time I had to sit down and talk to a group of girls between year 6 and year 8, it saved me 51 minutes. The next step along is as we get towards the formal end, it's structuring for teachers who will run classroom circles, and that's a whole other kettle of fish that I won't address today because I think the power is in starting at the informal end. And then we have our formal conferencing right down the end here, at the formal end. And there are far too many schools that think that they're doing restorative practices in their school if they run a formal conference when a kid comes back from suspension. It just doesn't happen that often, does it? So we're missing all of the multiple opportunities that are down at this informal end, and that's the power of that continuum. The second point over there is the idea of the operating domains and looking at those, and I'll defer a little bit of work on that because it's a very how thing. It's a great reflective tool for us to be able to use moving forward. The next thing I want to do is to talk about fair process. There are 3 E's involved in a fair process. It's about engagement, it's about explanation, it's about explanation, and it's about expectation clarity. So I won't go too heavily into those at the moment, but I do want to focus on that word process. Do you think that people are more motivated by a fair process or by a fair outcome? Now, the good part is that you're very typical educators who had a little awkward moment then of going, oh, I think he wants me to say process because it's on the screen. But I have found some people who are really obsessed by outcomes. And my evidence for the fact that we're actually wired more around the process is quite anecdotal also. I taught a fabulous group of kids who, again, that year 5, 6 class, who I really adored being in their company. And they were just that group of kids that was just happy all the time. They just got on so incredibly well. And they they were the one class that I taught that I loved the end of lunchtime. Because I'd go and open the door and I'd hear these fabulous stories about the cricket matches they'd had and the burgeoning relationships and that they were always quite cool about and everything like that. You know, it was just fun to let them in. And I got out there one day and I opened the door. There was about 5 weeks left in the school year. Year sixes are just starting to do that ratty thing, you know, they do. You can't do anything to me because I'm going to high school in a few weeks and all that sort of stuff. They were just starting to get that going. And I opened the door and they were all standing there like this. I thought, right. And so I said, come in. And they came in and I realised they were glaring at each other. So I immediately went, oh, it's not me. It's something that they've done to each other. And they came in and they sat down and not a word was spoken. And I said, what's going on? One of the girls muttered, nothing. I thought, do I dig my heels in here or do I, just teach maths? Well, I'll dig my heels in, it'll be fun. So I said, well, I've got plenty of time. I'll just sit here and wait until someone puts their hand up to tell me what's going on. And one of the girls put her hand up and she went, fine. She said, we've been saying mean things to each other and disgusting things about each other's mums. You know the yo mama jokes? That's what had got to run and it had upset some people. And so I said, okay. And the girl on the other side of the room all of a sudden piped up with, yeah, well, what you said about my mum was gross. And she said, well, it wasn't as bad as what you said about my mum. And bang, it's on. And all of a sudden we're talking and I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. And I said, so I threw a blanket over. I said, okay, I think I've got a handle on the past part here. I think I've got an understanding of what's happened here. I said, how's it making people feel? And the first girl put her hand up again and she said, I'm annoyed. And the girl on the other side of the room said, I'm angry. And then my serial crier burst into tears and said, I'm sad. So I said, okay, so we've got angry, sad and annoyed people. So what are we going to do about it? And one of the boys in the room, my ruckman Regan, put his hand up and he said, can't do the right thing at lunchtime, we don't get lunchtime. And this murmur of agreement went across the room. And then the kid next to him, Anthony, said, ever. And another murmur of agreement went across the classroom. And there is only one person in this classroom panicking at this point. I can feel the last 30 lunchtimes of the school year slipping through my fingers. And I didn't say anything about anyone's mum. And I'm thinking, this isn't on. Anyway, so I said, okay, guys, just stop for a sec. How about tomorrow you've got to stay in at lunchtime and you've got to play a board game with the person you've had a problem with and then we'll give it another go on Friday. And they went, right. Yeah, right. And I went, crisis averted. But can I ask you, can you imagine that I flipped the process there? Imagine that I finally got it out of the kids that we've been saying mean things to each other and disgusting things about each other's mum, and I just went, you know what, that's not on. Fine, no more lunchtimes for the rest of the school year. What have I got on my hands? Mutiny? And if not, then lots of decrying. That's not... We didn't see that coming, did we? We attach our fairness to the process. And if we get the process right, then people will accept an unpalatable outcome if they feel like they have had some engagement, some explanation and some expectation clarity. Moving on, down the bottom is about the restorative questions. Have people heard about the restorative questions before? Seen the little cards and things like that? I've got cards as well, they're good. But there's a fundamental mistake that we make with the cards, is that we think they're a script. We think they're something that you must get out to be restorative. And you must, when you see that child drop a piece of rubbish on the ground, that we must get the card out and ask the first question, which is what happened? I think we know. So the problem is that that's where people are wasting time around restorative practices by using the cards as a script. They're fabulous, the questions that are on restorative practices cards, okay? But they're a guide. And all they do is guide you from past to present to future. That's all they do. And then over on this side of the screen, we look at what we call the theory and the research. Now, the theory is that we need to move from this adversarial model that we have to the restorative model. The way that we can tell the difference between whether we're doing it or not is the type of questions that we ask. The adversarial model asks what happened, who's to blame, and what punishment or sanction is needed. Now, if we believe that that model is going to change behaviour, if we believe that all we need to do is to get the punishment to be equal or fairish enough or severe enough that the behaviour will go away, that's fine. But that model or that theory means that the death penalty for violent crimes in America should be reducing violent crime in America. How's that working out for them? Not quite so flash, is it? The restorative model is about holding young people account to the relationships that they build in the school in a very confronting and very difficult way, a very challenging way. But the questions are different. We find ourselves asking questions like, what happened? Sure, past. How did it make people feel? And what are you going to do to fix that? And so the whole model that sits behind that is something that kids can pick up on very quickly. I remember when I started at Rosebery Primary School and I thought, oh, well, I'll get around to the classrooms and try and meet as many students as I can. And I often asked them questions in the first couple of weeks that we were open, like, what sort of principal do you want? Bit gutsy, isn't it? You know, and they would give me a question, because it's Darwin School, so they would say things like, build a pool. I go, okay, not quite. Anyway, and I said, I'll tell you what the sort of principal that I will be is. I'll be the sort of principal that if you drop a drink in the classroom, I will not clean it up for you, but I'll show you where the mop is. And year one students would say to me, that means we have to fix it, but you'll help us. Spot on. Spot on. That's the kind of mentality and that's the kind of model shift that we're looking for our young people and our staff to make. And the research, one of the reasons that I'm such a strong advocate for restorative practices is because of the research body that sits behind it. And some of it is about something that we find very, very, very difficult to talk about. It's the research behind the human emotion of shame. Could I ask you, just at your table for just a moment, I want to ask a really strong, provocative question. While we're in this space, let's make it useful, let's talk about really big and important things. Is there a place for shame in our schools? Have a chat at your table. Answer that question for me. All right, I'll bring you back for a moment. Hopefully a topic that you can talk about in a little more detail over lunch. Could I get a quick show of hands? Put your hand up if you think yes, there's a place for shame in our schools. Put your hand up if you think no, there's absolutely no place for shame in our schools. Put your hand up if you think that it's a really difficult topic to talk about. Yeah, it is, but it's one we need to start getting our heads around. If we want our kids to have some level of emotional intelligence, that means they have intelligence about all emotions that are possible to experience, even the negative ones, because all of the emotions that we experience have a job. Fear has a job. What's fear's job? It's to keep you safe, isn't it? And it came from thousands of years ago. We might be sitting around a campfire having a nice meal of roast mammoth or something like that, and a saber-toothed tiger walks in. Is it time for me to look at Lorraine and say, you know what, I see that we have three options, Lorraine. Let me draw them for you in the dirt for a minute. Number one, because what's happened by now? We're dead. Fear's job is to trigger our fight or flight mechanism, because the truth is it's either grab a spear or it's run. What's shame's job? What do you reckon? Yeah. It allows our conscience to speak to us. It allows us to hear our conscience. So we want our young people to have a conscience. then we better start allowing them to experience shame the right way. Shame is our great central social regulator. It allows us to know when we've done the right thing and when we haven't. And all we need to know is that there's a difference between two types of shame. There's the stigmatising shame that is embarrassing and is punitive, and there's what we call through restorative practices the reintegrative type of shame, which means that we're exposed to the way that our behaviour has made other people feel, and we're given opportunity to do something about it so that we can be welcomed back into the flock. It's a fundamental emotion that allows us to believe in things like reject the sin but love the sinner. We want to love that person and give them the chance to do the right thing when we make mistakes. They're unfinished people, aren't they, our students? They're unfinished. And when we give them the opportunity to get it right, we expose them to shame in a way that allows them to grow emotionally. Not all emotions need to be positive for us to be well-rounded people. The world is not the Lego movie, is it? Where everything is awesome. And those negative emotions, we experience them for a reason, and we need our young people to know how to experience them. Part of our job is to teach them. So this is the what. This is the what of restorative practices. Okay, and what I want to actually do is just give you, to finish today, is just give you 10 things to think about the how. Number one is if you're thinking that this restorative journey could be something that could make a significant difference in your school, is to check in on your commitment. There are too many schools out there that are doing a bit of restorative practices and they're not getting the cultural benefit. They're using one little bit of the continuum, but down here we still do it differently. Can you feel the inconsistency in that? Do any of you guys teach boundary testers? Any kids who like to test the boundaries? Oh, yeah. They love it when we're inconsistent, when we do it differently down here than we do it up here. So don't do a bit of restorative practices. If it's something that you want to walk into, do it in a very comprehensive kind of way. The second thing I want to get clear for you is the idea that some people have this fear that emerges when they get restorative because it feels like this is the elimination of any consequences or punishments, and it's not. But it is about saying that if we want punishment or consequences to be relevant, then they need to be known in advance. You guys know that if you speed going home today, roughly what the fine will be, don't you? And if it arrives and it's $15,000, are you going to have a problem with that? So particularly for our recidivists, it's fine to have those punishments or consequences in there, but don't just apply them arbitrarily when we get to this has been 3 times in the last 2 weeks. At the second time, say, what do you reckon should happen if this happens again, because I can see a pattern emerging? And you'll be the one that says, I probably should get 2 lunchtimes and you should call my mum. We write it down, we put it in the drawer, and I say to you, I'll put it here, but I know I won't need it. Because when it happens, I just put it on the table in front of you, and your reaction won't be, oh, that's not fair, that's stupid, where'd that come from? Your reaction will be, oh, yeah, but, no, I know. Bit like our reaction when we get $186 and 1 demerit point. It's the way we're wired. Understanding the function of the questions, that they're not a script and that they're not a guide, is critically important to success in implementing restorative practices in your school, and that the goal of them is past, present, future. We have to understand that we are busting some very big myths. One is that restorative practices takes too long. 51 minutes saved every time the Year 7 girls present. And the other is that it's too soft. People will tell you that restorative practices is too soft. It feels like a fake apology. Did anyone feel that? Did anyone feel that these two, it feels like I'm eventually going to get you to look at him and say, sorry, has anyone done that in their own parenting? I do it all the time. I'm a restorative man, and I still find myself looking at the 15-year-old and going, say sorry to your brother. And she gives him a 15-year-old apology, 15-year-old girl apology. Sorry. And I walk off and go, good parenting. So we need to eliminate this idea that by making her sit down and actually understand how her brother felt when she stole the iPad off him is a beneficial thing to do, and it's quite confronting. It's quite difficult for them to talk through that. Tough. That's how we learn to interact as social human beings. The fifth thing I want you to remember is that this doesn't have to start with something enormous. It can start with the change in language that happens at the informal end of the continuum. effective statements. Donna Cross says that in any 90-minute presentation, people will take away about 7 seconds. Doesn't give me a lot, does it? If you're only taking 7 seconds with you from this presentation, say what I normally say and chuck in a feeling. That's all you need to do to get started with this. Critically important to have a plan. The restorative practices movement in Australia, I contend, is stalling because far too many schools think that the extent of becoming restorative is training. It's not about that, it's about everything that happens after the training. And having a plan to progress in areas like how we'll see changes in language, how we'll see changes in program, how we'll see changes in the playground, how we're going to communicate with our community about this is going to be also critical to underpinning your success. The tenets of restorative practices are harm and relationships. We're going to view everything through what's the harm of the issue that has come along when we have conflict, and how do we resolve it, how do we restore it in terms of building that relationship back up. Number 8 is that we're going to need to reflect. We're going to need to provide those opportunities for school leaders, are going to have to provide opportunities for teachers to sit down and reflect on their practice. And the best reflective tool I have at my avail is this. Who would say that the best teachers they've ever had were firm and fair? So many people think that that's a really great measure of a really effective teacher. And all this is doing is saying that when we get too firm and no fair, we tend to do things to the students. We get punitive. When we drop both of them, when we're not doing much at all, we're a bit lazy. When we're all fair and we're all love and hugs and support, but the expectations are low, we find ourselves doing things for the students all the time. But it's up here where we're firm where the expectations are consistently high, but the supports are also consistently strong, that we say that we're working with the students. And all it is a matter of remembering that firmness is about pressure limits and expectations and not compromising them. And fairness is about matching that with fantastic support, encouragement and nurturing. And exploring times when we might drift out of the with box. Because I do. Where do you reckon I go? What do you reckon my default is when I drift out of the with box? Have a guess. Do you reckon I go to the 4 box? Am I a sucker? Or do you reckon I'm a not boxer and I hide behind the newspaper? Or am I a 2 boxer and I get really angry and narky? Yeah, I'm a 2 boxer, aren't I? Hey! Cut that out right now! I said I don't know what it is about me. I don't know whether it's a blokey thing or what it is, but I can drift over there. And what I've learned is that when I do make that mistake in my practice, I can go back and I can talk to my colleagues about better ways to go back. And I can talk to my colleagues about better ways to stay in the with box. And structuring for those conversations to happen will be critical to your success with restorative practices too. And the final thing I want to recommend to you is that you take your time. Restorative practices isn't about a moment. It isn't about a training. It isn't about just doing the language thing and just chucking in a feeling. It's getting clear about the awkwardness that came over here around the shame stuff. And how can we have the conversation so that we can make sense of that and be consistent with it. And that will take time. And it will take, as leaders, being consistently firm and fair as well about ourselves. So I just want to finish up again by showing you that there's a couple of ways that we would love to be able to support you with that. The forms that you've got on your table, I just want to, if you're interested in connecting in any way, even in the most informal way, just grab one of those forms that we've put on your table and put your personal details on there. At the top there is if you would like the free ebook. At the bottom there is if you would like to sign up as a member school. Your whole school can come on for $249. In the middle part is if you were interested in what we talked about with what Henderson College are doing with our partnership that extends over 1, 2 or 3 years. We understand that you're not going to want to sign up for that now. Oh yes, good speech, 3-year commitment. That's not quite the way things work. So Ryan, if you tick that box for your school, Ryan or I will get in touch and we'll arrange to have a coffee with you. We'll even bring you the coffee that you're looking for because we've seen the 4-litre tub of International Roast in the staff room. And so if you write down there the coffee that you would like to have, we'll bring that along with us and have a chat with you about it. But there are also two other ways that we would love to be able to support you and your teachers and your staff and your school moving forward. One is that I was challenged a bit over 12 months ago that you can't do professional learning for teachers without being face-to-face. And I thought, I think that's nonsense. I think we can. And I don't think for schools, such as in Mildura, have the opportunity to jump on a plane every second week to send teachers to professional learning in major cities. So we developed a 12-month program for teachers specifically around the key elements of great teacher practice within the walls of the classroom. So there are 10 elements, 10 months within the 12-month program, because we don't send them out in December and January for obvious reasons. And you sit down and you watch a video between 30 and 50 minutes. You answer some key reflection questions that come to us at Real Schools, but also go to a local mentor identified within the school. The local mentor is also supported by resources in the school, and our fast-track teachers get a 60-minute coaching session at some stage during their course, and they get a 20-minute emergency coaching session as well for when it really hits the fan. And they really need someone to talk to. And we're really proud of that. So there's a whole bunch of brochures that we've got at the back of the room, and if over lunch you want to have a yak about that, Ryan or I would be happy to do that with you. And we also have a 12-month coaching relationship that we use to help leaders who are implementing this. And there's a whole heap of book resources and the opportunity to have 2 coaching sessions every term with an experienced school leader. Ryan was the 2014 Northern Territory Principal of the Year, and nobody who delivers Real Schools work will do that unless they've been in the big chair in school. It'll be an experienced, successful principal that your school leaders will get the chance to talk to and work through our framework for making this stuff work for you. So just want to let you know that those things are available to you, and that Real Schools is built in a way that's designed not to have it drop and run on you. So feel free, go and have a good look around the website. Come and have a yarn at lunchtime. We've got a whole bunch of information here that we hope can be of use to you. We'll scoot around at lunch and grab the sheets off the table. So if you just fill your details out there and leave it on the table, we'll pick it up and make sure that something happens to support you and your school. And I just can't commend any more strongly to you that in my experience and through everything that I've read around culture and behaviour, the restorative practices is the most powerful tool that you can pull in your school to get the sort of culture that you're looking for. Good luck. Thank you so much for your attention. Enjoy the rest of the day.